hurtling through the Easter season, the fourth Sunday, and suddenly hurtling back in John, we find ourselves with the Good Shepherd, a passage well known to most of us who are of the faith. But first, let me introduce Deborah from Napier. First time tonight. Thank you for joining the crew. Damon thank you. Damon in Wanaka and Lisa in Palmerston North. We've got a nice spread tonight. And it is Lisa who has a little bit of background onto this famous passage.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I always find it really helpful to look at a biblical passage in context, and I think that is important here. So just before Jesus makes this comment about the Good Shepherd, we had the wonderful story about Jesus opening the eyes of the man born blind, and he does it on the Sabbath. And this has caused the Pharisees a great deal of consternation. So at this stage, the Pharisees are divided. Some of them are saying he can't be from God because he healed on the Sabbath. And the others are saying, but how could someone do something as amazing as this and not be from God? And so it's important to see that the passage that we read today is actually addressed to the Pharisees, that Jesus is not talking to the disciples or the crowd. He's talking to the Pharisees. Another important thing to note are that there are significant resonances with the image of the shepherd. In describing himself as the shepherd, Jesus is aligning himself with King David, the shepherd boy. He's establishing his lineage, his credentials, if you will. But he's also aligning himself with Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. So this is no simple statement. By bringing this resonance to what he says, he's spelling out who he is. He's the king, he's the Lord who leads us beside still waters and vanquishes our enemies. It's an absolutely audacious, outrageous claim. One little thing I noticed as well, just an aside, is it's interesting that he's giving the Pharisees advance warning of what is to come and what they're going to do. And I wonder how many of them remembered this conversation with Jesus as he was led before the high priest on his final night.
All right. Well, you've thrown some gauntlets down already in the background, and I like this audacity. I think that's a really interesting point. Damon, what do you find challenging when you're confronted by this passage?
Well, we live in a part of the country where shepherds and sheep are all about us. And I think it's that familiarity that can sometimes be a little unhelpful when we come to this particular text, because our experience of shepherds and farming and sheep is very different to that which happened in the first century. But also for those who first heard John's gospel, they were so shaped, as Lisa's just mentioned before, by the whole scriptural tradition that preceded it. It's all those principal characters in the Old Testament. Many of them were shepherds, like Moses, like King David, that imagery there. When we come to the prophets, we've got people like Amos, who was a shepherd prophet, and those scathing words of the prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, who said, woe to the shepherds. And so for me, I think the challenge is that sometimes we can listen to this passage and think of it in the light of those beautiful images of the shepherd holding a lamb, but to know that beneath all that wonderful imagery, there's also a real sharp edge to this too. And Lisa's already pointed to that, and that's the challenge. It's to the religious leaders of Jesus's day, but it's also to those who have leadership in one form or another, including us in the church today. So it speaks into our context.
All right, let's go to you, Deborah, and ask, you're confronted by this passage. What do you find challenging?
I think a little bit like Damon, the distinction between the good shepherd or the noble shepherd is one translation, or the ideal shepherd who really cares, and the hired hand who leaves when it gets tough. And shepherd is about leadership. It's an image for king. I always remember, the 23rd Psalm in Latin starts off Dominus regit me, the Lord rules me. And so our leaders, and are we, when we're the leading ones, are we ones who really care, or are we only out for ourselves and our brilliant careers?
Thank you. Lisa, you've thrown some good background, but what do you find challenging?
Oh, well, I went in a completely different direction. So for me, the challenge is considering what Jesus meant when he said there were sheep not of this fold, who he will gather into the flock. The obvious interpretation is that he's referring to the Gentiles. But what if he meant people who are not like me? You know, I don't know, Trump voting evangelicals or devout Muslims or the drug addicts in the town centre. You know, how much am I inclined to decide who's in and out of Jesus' fold? How welcoming am I to people who are not like me? You know, in this passage, my heart aches for the Pharisees who, in their own terms, were just trying to hold the line on the law, but also for Jesus, who was still so patiently trying to teach them. In the end, the Pharisees prove unteachable. But how teachable am I? How open am I to the unexpected message?
Well, I don't know, but I think the three of you have left me a little uncomfortable here and coming from different angles. So please, let's go with you, Damon, and get some good news here.
Yeah, well, I go back to that imagery that I mentioned just before of the image of Jesus, the Good Shepherd with the lamb, because back in 1990, I was given a Christmas present by my mother. And it was a sketch that she had seen in the wall of some missionary office somewhere of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. And she thought that my brother and I would each like one of these pictures and gave it to me. And it was just at a time in my life where I was going through a bit of a rough patch, and it really spoke to me and gave me enormous amount of comfort. And the particular image, which is actually hanging up in the office here, shows the image of Jesus holding tenderly a lamb, and his hand is wounded. You could see the nail scars on it, and reminds me of the one that loves me so intimately is also wounded. And there I find such hope and goodness, you know, that image of the wounded healer, which was spoken of before.
So you're holding together there the wounds and the tenderness. And we do tend to diss some of the high Renaissance art of Jesus and the Lamb, but there's a place for it, it seems. Let's see where that goes. Ask you, Lisa, where you find some good news here.
Actually, I have an image of the Good Shepherd from which was painted by Julie Gregg. She's a New Zealand artist, and it's a beautiful thing. If you can find it, look it up on the internet. I've always loved Psalm 23, and I mean, we all do. But what I love about these verses is that the shepherd goes from being an anonymous lord to being someone I know. So Jesus leads me beside still waters. Jesus lays a banquet for me in the presence of my enemies. Jesus is there when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And because this is the Easter season, we know why he is that one walking with us in those hard times, because he has walked through that valley himself. And I know we're looking backwards, but in a sense, all the beauty, all the promises of Psalm 23 are possible because of Holy Week and Easter Sunday. So Jesus is the shepherd who laid down his life and restores my soul. That is the best possible news.
And he really turns up in some dark places, doesn't he? So, all right, I do find some good news there. Deborah?
The bit about I know my own, or my own know me. And of course, know isn't just seeing and understanding, you know, with our heads, but knowing through the heart, knowing through relationship. And Jesus knows us like that through relationship. And we're invited to know him in this relationship as well. And when we are known like that, and when we know Jesus' love for us, then we can go out and change the world, because then our vulnerability is kind of held in Jesus' hands. And knowing that we are loved, we can do anything.
That knowing is very intense, isn't it? That is both deeply enriching and deeply disturbing in the best way possible. So let's ask Damon then, so what?
I love the way, Lisa, you brought up Psalm 23, because in many respects that is the so what for me. You know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and so forth. That sense of knowing that I'm not alone. These passages are about a deep intimacy and abiding in, and the season of Easter calls us to move ever deeper into that relationship with God, which is, as Deborah said, in that sense of knowing that we are loved simply for who we are and known for who we are, enables us to be that to those around us as well. And so the so what is there, isn't it? Is that knowing that we are deeply loved is to go out there and to express in whatever way that same level of love and relationship with those about us. Take us into those places where Jesus is.
It would be very interesting to count the number of times we've begun to mention the word love in this conversation, which is, really a rewarding slant on where we're at in the Easter season. Deborah, for you, so what?
To pick up on what Lisa said about the inclusivity, that I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and Jesus's radical inclusivity in a setting for us where we tend to split things off into cliques or tribes, or the people like me and people not like me. How can we show that kind of inclusivity? How well are we able to handle ambiguity, to handle otherness? I remember years ago in a pastoral class, the phrase, the otherness that bites. How well are we able to understand and to want to include people who are radically different from us?
Well, we're back to a challenge there, Deborah, for your so what, but I think that's fair enough. I mean, let's not be complacent. We're not allowed to be in the face of this. Lisa, so what? A final word.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of gather all of that up. I think for me, the so what is the call to expect the unexpected and to have our preconceptions disrupted and disturbed. And, for the Pharisees, there would have been such a shock in being described as the hired hands. They were so sure of where they sat, and yet they're not the shepherd, they're not the sheep, they're the hired hands. And so the question that I would be inviting people to sit with is this: in what way is Jesus disrupting our expectations of who we are and who else belongs in the flock, as Deborah says? So how is he disturbing our church communities? Who are we excluding intentionally or unintentionally? And how is he prodding us as individuals to let go our preconceptions, to see people in new ways? Who is he asking you to invite into the sheepfold? And I thought perhaps there's a deeper question to leave people with, which is, what part of you, which is the excluded bit, which you are holding back? What part of you are you withholding from Jesus' loving care? What part of you, perhaps hidden, perhaps something you don't even want to admit to, is Jesus inviting into his pasture? And we say all that in the concept, enclosed in what Damon said, of knowing that we are loved completely.
I really don't want to add to that conversation at all. That's really been incisive, and the three of you have really just gone right into that passage. So Deborah, Damon, Lisa, thank you so much for breaking open the word.